In the small, quiet town of Millbrook, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. People knew each other by name, and nothing much seemed to happen that would disrupt the calm rhythm of daily life. But all of that changed one fateful afternoon when a violent storm swept through the area, leaving behind chaos and destruction. The storm began suddenly, catching everyone off guard. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and within minutes rain poured down in sheets. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the town in flashes of white light. The wind howled like a wild animal, tearing branches from trees and scattering debris across roads and yards. When it finally passed, residents emerged from their homes to assess the damage. Power lines were down, roofs had been torn apart, and the once pristine cemetery on the outskirts of town was now a mess of broken headstones and uprooted trees. Harold Jenkins, the cemetery's groundskeeper, arrived early the next morning to clean up the wreckage. Harold was a wiry man in his late 50s with a kind face and a deep respect for the dead. He had worked at the cemetery for over 2 decades and took pride in keeping it neat and peaceful. Today, however, the place looked like a war zone. Fallen branches littered the ground, and several graves had been disturbed by the storm. As Harold worked his way through the rows of headstones, he noticed something unusual. Near the older section of the cemetery, a patch of earth that seemed out of place. At first glance, it looked like just another part of the ground that had been churned up by the storm. But as Harold got closer, he realized there was something more sinister about it. A corner of what appeared to be wood was sticking out of the soil. Kneeling down, he brushed away some dirt and froze. It wasn't just wood. It was the edge of a coffin. The lid was cracked open, revealing glimpses of its contents inside. Harold's heart sank. This wasn't supposed to happen. Coffins weren't meant to surface like this, especially not in a well-maintained cemetery like this one. Feeling uneasy, Harold called the police immediately. He didn't know what else to do. While waiting for them to arrive, he couldn't help but peer into the damaged coffin again. What he saw made his stomach churn. Inside, among the remnants of decay, lay fragments of clothing that looked surprisingly modern, far too recent to belong to someone buried here decades ago. There was also something shiny tucked beneath the fabric. Squinting, Harold leaned closer and gasped. It was a badge, glinting faintly in the morning light. When Officer Rachel Monroe arrived at the scene, she could sense the tension in the air. Rachel was known throughout the department for her sharp instincts and unwavering dedication to justice. She had grown up in Millbrook and understood the importance of protecting her community. As she approached Harold, who stood nervously beside the exposed coffin, she asked him to explain what he'd found. His voice trembled as he recounted the discovery, pointing toward the open casket. Rachel nodded solemnly and knelt down to take a closer look. What she saw left her speechless. The sight of the badge sent a chill running down her spine. It was unmistakably a police badge, though slightly tarnished with age. The design was familiar, yet different enough to suggest it came from an earlier era. Her mind raced with questions. Who was buried here? Why did they have a police badge? And why was the coffin so poorly sealed that it had surfaced during the storm? Something about this situation felt profoundly wrong. Rachel carefully reached into the coffin, her gloved hand brushing against the brittle material. She pulled out the badge and examined it closely. Engraved on the front were the words Millbrook Police Department, along with a badge number, 714. That number struck a chord deep within her memory. She had heard stories about Badge 714 before, whispered among veteran officers during her training days. It belonged to Detective James Carter, a man whose name was synonymous with mystery and tragedy. Carter had vanished without a trace decades ago, leaving behind only rumors of corruption and betrayal. As Rachel continued inspecting the coffin, she spotted something else tucked beneath the folds of fabric, a leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn and cracked, but it seemed intact. Carefully, she opened it and flipped through the yellowed pages. Handwritten entries filled the book, some in neat script, others scribbled hastily as if written in a rush. The dates indicated these writings spanned the final months of Carter's life. One entry caught her eye. "They're watching me. I can feel it. If anything happens to me, trust no one, not even those wearing the same badge." Rachel's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a random discovery. It was a clue, perhaps even evidence of something far bigger than she could imagine. She glanced back at Harold, who was still standing nearby, visibly shaken. "Did you touch anything else?" she asked gently. He shook his head, his eyes wide, with fear. "Just the badge," he replied. "I didn't mean to pry, I swear." Rachel reassured him that he had done the right thing by calling the police. Still, she couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. Whoever Detective Carter was, whatever secrets he carried to his grave, they were now resurfacing, and Rachel had no idea where this trail would lead. All she knew was that she couldn't ignore it. For the sake of justice, for the memory of a fellow officer, and for the truth buried alongside him, she had to find answers. As she stood up and surveyed the scene one last time, Rachel felt a strange mix of dread and determination. This case was unlike anything she'd ever encountered, and she suspected it would test her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Little did she know, the damaged coffin held not only the remains of a man, but also the key to unraveling a web of lies that stretched back decades. Officer Rachel Monroe couldn't stop thinking about the damaged coffin and the badge she had found inside. The discovery haunted her, not just because it was strange and unsettling, but because it felt deeply personal. Detective James Carter's name wasn't just a distant memory from old police stories. It was part of the town's history, a shadowy figure whose disappearance had never been explained. And now, his journal rested in Rachel's hands, its pages filled with cryptic entries that hinted at danger and betrayal. That night, Rachel sat alone in her small apartment, the journal spread out on her kitchen table. She poured herself a cup of coffee and began reading again, this time more carefully. Each entry painted a picture of a man growing increasingly paranoid, convinced that he was being followed and that his life was in danger. "They know I'm onto them," one passage read. "Every step I take is met with resistance. Even my own colleagues seem to be turning against me." Another entry mentioned vague threats made over the phone and suspicious figures lurking near his home. It was as if Carter had been living under constant surveillance, unable to trust anyone, not even his fellow officers. Rachel's mind raced as she tried to piece together what Carter might have uncovered. The journal didn't provide specific names or details, but it was clear that whatever he had stumbled upon was big enough to make powerful people nervous. Her thoughts kept returning to the badge. Why would a decorated detective like Carter end up buried in such an unusual manner? Was his death accidental, or had it been deliberate? And who were they that he kept referring to? The next morning, Rachel decided to dig deeper into Carter's past. She started by visiting retired officers who might remember him. First on her list was Officer Walter Briggs, a grizzled veteran who had served alongside Carter in the 1970s. Briggs lived in a modest house on the edge of town, surrounded by flower beds and bird feeders. When Rachel knocked on his door, he greeted her with a warm smile, though it faded quickly when she mentioned Carter's name. "James Carter," Briggs said slowly, shaking his head. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in years. What do you want to know about him?" "I found something related to him recently," Rachel replied cautiously. "Something unexpected. I'm trying to understand what happened to him." Briggs sighed heavily and invited her inside. Over cups of tea, he shared fragments of Carter's story. According to Briggs, Carter had been a dedicated officer, known for his relentless pursuit of justice. But toward the end of his career, things changed. He started asking too many questions, Briggs explained, about certain cases, certain people who didn't like being questioned. Then one day he just disappeared. No note, no explanation, nothing. Rachel listened intently, scribbling notes in her notebook. "Did anyone look into his disappearance?" she asked. Briggs hesitated before answering. "There was an investigation, sure, but it didn't go far. Too many loose ends, they said. Some folks thought maybe he left town voluntarily, tired of all the politics. Others believed something worse happened to him. Personally, I think he got too close to something he shouldn't have. The conversation left Rachel with more questions than answers. If Carter had indeed uncovered something dangerous, why hadn't anyone pursued it further? Who were these certain people Briggs had referred to? Determined to find out, Rachel spent the rest of the day combing through old case files at the station. Most of the records from the 1970s were stored in dusty boxes in the basement, untouched for decades. It took hours of searching, but eventually she found a file labeled Carter James Missing Persons Report. Inside, she discovered a brief summary of Carter's last known activities. He had been investigating a high-profile drug bust, gone wrong. A sting operation that resulted in the deaths of 2 undercover agents and the escape of several suspects. The official report stated that the failure was due to poor planning and bad luck, but Rachel noticed inconsistencies. Witness statements were missing, evidence logs incomplete, and key details omitted altogether. Something about the whole thing felt off, almost deliberately obscured. Her suspicions deepened when she came across a handwritten note tucked into the corner of the file. It was addressed to Carter and signed simply as JG. The message read, "Back off or else." Rachel stared at the words, her stomach twisting with unease. This wasn't just negligence. It was intimidation. Someone had wanted Carter to stop digging, and judging by the outcome, they had succeeded. Later that evening, Rachel decided to reach out to Carter's family. After some research, she located his daughter, Emily Carter, who now lived in a neighboring city. Emily was hesitant to speak with Rachel at first, saying she hadn't seen or heard from her father in years, but after a long phone call, she agreed to meet in person the following day. When Rachel arrived at the cafe where they had arranged to meet, Emily was already seated at a table, nervously stirring her coffee. She looked nothing like the photos Rachel had seen of Carter, younger, softer, with wide eyes that seemed perpetually worried. As they introduced themselves, Emily admitted she had mixed feelings about revisiting the past. "My dad and I weren't close," she said quietly. "He was always working, always chasing something. By the time I was a teenager, we barely spoke. Then one day he just vanished. No goodbye, no explanation. I never heard from him again." Rachel nodded sympathetically. "I understand how painful this must be," she said. "But I think your father may have uncovered something important before he disappeared, something that could still matter today." Emily frowned. "What kind of something?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," Rachel admitted. "But based on what I've found so far, it seems like he was looking into corruption within the department. Maybe even ties to organized crime." At those words, Emily's expression shifted. For the first time, she looked genuinely interested. "That doesn't surprise me," she said. "Before he disappeared, Dad used to talk about the shadows, pulling the strings. He said the system was rotten, that people in power were protecting criminals instead of stopping them. I thought he was just paranoid, but—" She trailed off, staring into her coffee cup. Rachel leaned forward. "Do you remember anything else he might have said? Any names, places, or events?" Emily shook her head. "Not really. Just that he was scared. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. He acted like someone was watching him all the time. One night he told me to stay away from the department, to never trust anyone wearing a badge. Then he left and I never saw him again." The weight of Emily's words settled heavily on Rachel. Here was confirmation that Carter's fears hadn't been baseless. They had been rooted in reality. Whoever he had crossed paths with had silenced, impermanently. But why bury him in a coffin meant for someone else? And how had his death remained hidden for so long? As Rachel drove back to Millbrook that evening, her mind buzzed with possibilities. Every new piece of information brought her closer to the truth, but it also raised more questions. She knew she was treading dangerous ground. If Carter's suspicions were correct, then exposing the truth could put her in harm's way. Yet, despite the risks, she couldn't turn away. Justice demanded answers, and Rachel was determined to find them, even if it meant risking everything. Rachel Monroe's investigation into Detective James Carter's mysterious disappearance was becoming more complex with each passing day. The clues she had uncovered so far painted a troubling picture: corruption, intimidation, and possibly murder, all hidden beneath the surface of Millbrook's seemingly peaceful facade. But the deeper she dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about one man's fate. It was about exposing a web of deceit that had festered for decades. The next morning, Rachel returned to the basement archives at the police station, determined to piece together the full story behind the botched drug bust Carter had been investigating. She pulled out every file related to the case, stacking them on a rickety table in the dimly lit room. Dust motes floated lazily in the air as she sifted through yellowed documents and grainy photographs. Each page revealed new inconsistencies: missing evidence logs, unsigned affidavits, and witness statements that contradicted one another. It was as if someone had deliberately tampered with the records to obscure the truth. One name kept appearing in the files: Victor Langston. According to the reports, Langston was a local businessman who had been implicated in the drug ring, but walked away scot-free after the operation failed. Rachel remembered hearing whispers about him during her early years on the force. He was a wealthy and influential figure in Millbrook, known for his charitable donations and flashy lifestyle. Yet there were always rumors swirling around him, rumors of ties to organized crime, money laundering, and bribes. Could Langston have been involved in silencing Carter? Rachel decided to pay him a visit. She drove to his sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, a mansion surrounded by manicured lawns and iron gates. When she arrived, she was greeted by a stern-looking security guard who asked her purpose for visiting. "I'm here to speak with Mr. Langston," Rachel said firmly, showing her badge. After a brief phone call, the guard reluctantly let her through. Inside the opulent house, Rachel found Langston lounging in a leather armchair, sipping coffee. He was impeccably dressed, with silver hair and a polished demeanor that exuded confidence. "Officer Monroe," he said smoothly, standing to shake her hand. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Rachel cut straight to the point. "I'm investigating an old case involving a drug sting operation from the 1970s. Your name came up in connection with it." Langston raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Ah, yes, that unfortunate incident. Such a shame how things turned out. But surely you're not suggesting I had anything to do with it?" "No," Rachel replied evenly, "but I am curious why someone like you would be mentioned in the same breath as a criminal enterprise." Langston chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Rumors, Officer Monroe. Just rumors. People love to gossip, especially when it comes to success stories like mine. I assure you, I've done nothing illegal." Despite his calm exterior, Rachel noticed subtle signs of unease, a flicker in his eyes, a slight tightening of his jaw. She pressed further, asking about his relationship with Detective Carter. Langston's smile faltered for a moment before returning, wider than before. "Detective Carter? Yes, I recall meeting him once or twice. A dedicated officer, though perhaps a bit too zealous for his own good. Whatever happened to him anyway?" "He disappeared," Rachel said bluntly. "And I think it might have something to do with this case." Langston shrugged, dismissing her claim with a wave of his hand. "That's quite the accusation. But without proof, it's all speculation, isn't it? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a busy schedule ahead." Frustrated but undeterred, Rachel left the mansion feeling certain that Langston knew more than he was letting on. His casual dismissal of Carter's disappearance only fueled her determination to uncover the truth. She realized she needed stronger evidence, something concrete that could link Langston to the conspiracy. Back at the station, Rachel shared her findings with her trusted partner, Officer Liam Hayes. Liam was a seasoned investigator with a knack for connecting dots that others missed. Together, they reviewed the files Rachel had gathered and brainstormed possible leads. "If Langston is dirty, then we need to find proof," Liam said thoughtfully. "But going after someone like him won't be easy. He's got connections everywhere." Rachel nodded grimly. "I know, but we can't let fear stop us. If Carter sacrificed everything to expose corruption, the least we can do is finish what he started." Their conversation shifted to Emily Carter, who had mentioned receiving warnings from her father before his disappearance. Maybe she has something of his, Liam suggested. Something he left behind, a key, a document, anything. Rachel agreed and reached out to Emily again. This time, Emily invited her over to search her father's belongings, which she had stored in boxes since his disappearance. The two women spent hours rummaging through old clothes, books, and personal items. Finally, tucked inside a shoebox filled with photographs, they found a small folded piece of paper. It was a map of Millbrook, marked with an X near an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. "This must mean something," Rachel said, holding up the map. "Do you recognize this place?" Emily shook her head. "No, but knowing Dad, it's probably important. He wouldn't mark it unless it mattered." Rachel thanked Emily and headed to the location with Liam. The warehouse was decrepit, its windows boarded up, and its walls covered in graffiti. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. They searched carefully, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. In one corner, they discovered a locked metal cabinet. Using a crowbar, Liam pried it open to reveal stacks of documents, cash, bundles, and photographs of prominent figures, including Victor Langston, engaged in illegal activities. "This is it," Rachel whispered, her heart pounding. "This is the proof we've been looking for." As they packed up the evidence, Rachel felt a surge of hope. For the first time, she believed they might actually bring justice to those who had betrayed their badges and silenced Detective Carter. But she also knew the fight wasn't over yet. Langston and his allies wouldn't go down without a fight, and exposing them would come at a cost. Driving back to the station, Rachel glanced at Liam. "We need to be smart about this," she said. "If we move too quickly, they'll shut us down. We have to plan our next steps carefully." Liam nodded. "Agreed. But no matter what happens, we stick together. We owe it to Carter. And to ourselves." Rachel smiled faintly, grateful for his support. She knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but she also knew she couldn't turn back now. The truth was within reach, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead to ensure it saw the light of day. Rachel Monroe and Liam Hayes knew they were sitting on a powder keg. The evidence they had uncovered in the abandoned warehouse was damning. Photos, documents, and stacks of cash that tied Victor Langston and several other powerful figures to illegal activities. It was irrefutable proof of corruption, betrayal, and criminal enterprise. But as satisfying as it felt to hold the truth in their hands, Rachel couldn't shake the gnawing fear that they were being watched. Every step forward seemed to echo, louder than it should, and every decision carried the weight of potential danger. The first sign that someone was onto them came late one evening at the station. Rachel and Liam had spent hours organizing the evidence into clear categories, preparing to present it to higher authorities. They were careful not to discuss specifics aloud, opting instead for handwritten notes and encrypted messages on their phones. Despite these precautions, Rachel noticed something odd. Her desk drawer, which she had locked before leaving for lunch, was slightly ajar when she returned. Inside, the file containing copies of the evidence appeared untouched. But the faint impression left by someone rifling through it was unmistakable. Liam spotted it too. "Someone's been here," he muttered under his breath, glancing around the otherwise empty room. "Do you think it's internal?" Rachel asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It has to be," Liam replied grimly. "Who else would know where we keep our files? And who else would have access to your desk?" The realization hit Rachel like a punch to the gut. If someone within the department was involved, if they were working with Langston or others implicated in the conspiracy, then no one could be trusted, not even Chief Grayson, who had already warned her to drop the investigation. Was he part of this web, or just another pawn being manipulated? Either way, Rachel knew they couldn't risk staying at the station any longer. That night, Rachel and Liam transferred the evidence to a secure location, a rented storage unit under fake names, and began planning their next move. They decided to reach out to an independent journalist named Claire Bennett, whose reputation for exposing corruption was well known. Claire had broken several high-profile stories over the years, often putting herself in harm's way to shine a light on injustice. If anyone could help them get the truth out safely, it was her. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. Claire listened intently as Rachel and Liam explained everything: the damaged coffin, Carter's journal, the map leading to the warehouse, and the evidence they had gathered. Her expression shifted from skepticism to shock as they laid out the documents and photographs on the table. "This is huge," Claire said finally, her voice low but steady. "If what you're saying is true, then this goes beyond Millbrook. These people aren't just criminals, they're untouchables. Exposing them will make enemies at every level." "We know the risks," Rachel replied firmly. "But we can't let this stay buried. Detective Carter gave his life trying to uncover this. We owe it to him, and to everyone who suffered because of their crimes, to bring them down." Claire nodded slowly. "All right, I'll help you, but we need to be smart about this. Once this story breaks, there'll be no turning back. Are you prepared for that?" Rachel exchanged a glance with Liam. Both of them understood the gravity of the situation. Their careers, their safety, even their lives, were on the line. But neither of them hesitated. "We're ready," Rachel said. Over the next few days, Rachel, Liam, and Claire worked tirelessly to compile the evidence into a cohesive narrative. They cross-referenced dates, names, and events, ensuring that every detail was accurate and verifiable. Claire drafted an exposé that would name names and provide undeniable proof of wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Rachel and Liam made copies of all the documents, stashing them in multiple secure locations in case the originals were destroyed. But their efforts didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as Rachel and Liam drove home after another long day of preparation, they noticed a car tailing them. At first, it stayed a safe distance behind, but as they turned onto quieter roads, it sped up, its headlights glaring menacingly in their rearview mirror. "Hold on!" Liam shouted, slamming his foot on the accelerator. The car chased them recklessly, swerving dangerously close as if trying to force them off the road. Rachel gripped the dashboard, her heart racing. She glanced back just in time to see the other vehicle ram into their bumper, sending them skidding across the wet pavement. For a terrifying moment, Rachel thought they might flip over. But Liam managed to regain control, steering the car onto a narrow dirt path that led into the woods. The pursuing car screeched to a halt, unwilling or unable to follow them into the dense forest. Breathing heavily, Rachel and Liam sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sound of rain pattering against the windshield. "They know," Rachel whispered, breaking the stillness. "They know we're close. And they'll stop at nothing to silence us," Liam added grimly. Realizing they couldn't return to their homes or the station, Rachel and Liam went into hiding. They contacted Claire, who arranged for them to stay at a secluded cabin owned by a friend. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it offered temporary safety while they finalized their plans. Over the next few days, they communicated only through encrypted messages and burner phones, knowing that any slip-up could cost them everything. Despite the constant fear and exhaustion, Rachel found herself reflecting on how far they had come. What started as a simple investigation into a damaged coffin had spiraled into a fight against systemic corruption. She thought about Detective James Carter, whose courage and determination had inspired her to keep going despite the odds. His journal entries often echoed in her mind, particularly the ones where he expressed his fears about being watched and betrayed. Now, Rachel understood exactly what he had faced, and why he had refused to give up. One evening, as she and Liam reviewed the final draft of Claire's exposé, Rachel felt a surge of resolve. "This isn't just about justice for Carter anymore," she said softly. "It's about proving that the system can still work, even when it feels broken. If we don't stand up now, who will?" Liam nodded, smiling faintly. "Then let's finish this together." The three of them agreed to release the story the following morning. Claire would publish the exposé online, while Rachel and Liam prepared to hand over the physical evidence to federal investigators who specialized in corruption cases. It was a risky move, but they believed it was their best chance at ensuring accountability. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Rachel stood outside the cabin, watching the horizon light up with streaks of orange and pink. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult and the consequences unpredictable, but she knew one thing for certain: the truth was worth fighting for. The morning after Rachel, Liam, and Claire finalized their plans, the town of Millbrook woke up to a storm, not of rain or wind, but of headlines. Claire's exposé had gone live online at midnight, titled "Shadows in Uniform: Uncovering Decades of Corruption in Millbrook." The article was explosive, naming names, presenting irrefutable evidence, and detailing how powerful figures within the police department, local government, and organized crime had colluded for decades. Photographs of Victor Langston and others engaging in illegal activities were splashed across the screen alongside transcripts of incriminating conversations. By sunrise, the story had gone viral, spreading like wildfire through social media and news outlets. For Rachel and Liam, hiding in the secluded cabin, the tension was palpable. They watched the fallout unfold on Claire's laptop, refreshing the page every few minutes to see updates. Comments poured in from shocked residents of Millbrook, demanding justice and accountability. Calls for investigations flooded local authorities, forcing them to respond publicly. But as the hours passed, it became clear that not everyone was willing to let the truth surface without a fight. Around mid-morning, Rachel's burner phone buzzed with an incoming message from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it, her gut instinct telling her something was wrong. The text read, "You think you're safe? We know where you are. Stop this now, or else." Rachel's hands trembled as she showed the message to Liam. "They're watching us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Even out here." Liam clenched his jaw, anger flashing in his eyes. "Whoever sent this is bluffing, or trying, to scare us into backing down. We can't let them win." But the threat wasn't empty. Just moments later, they heard the distant rumble of engines approaching the cabin. Peering cautiously out the window, they saw two black SUVs speeding down the narrow dirt road leading to their location. Panic surged through Rachel, but Liam quickly sprang into action. "Grab the evidence," he urged, shoving the documents and flash drives into a waterproof bag. "We need to move. Now." They slipped out the back door just as the vehicles screeched to a halt outside. Ducking low, they sprinted through the woods, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. Branches snagged at their clothes, and the uneven terrain made running difficult. But they pushed forward, knowing their lives depended on it. Behind them, they could hear voices shouting and boots crunching against leaves. Whoever was chasing them wasn't far behind. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small creek and followed it downstream, hoping the water would mask their trail. Eventually, they stumbled upon an abandoned hunting cabin tucked deep in the forest. It was crude and dilapidated, but it offered temporary refuge. Once inside, they barricaded the door with whatever furniture they could find and collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. "We can't stay here long," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "They'll find us eventually." "I know," Liam replied grimly. "But we've got one advantage: they don't know we have backup copies of everything. If we can get those to the feds, we'll be okay." Using a secure satellite phone provided by Claire, they contacted federal investigators who specialized in corruption cases. Over the encrypted line, they explained their situation and arranged for agents to meet them at a designated safe house 3 towns over. The journey there would be dangerous, but staying put was even riskier. As night fell, Rachel and Liam set out again, moving cautiously under the cover of darkness. They stuck to back roads and avoided populated areas, constantly checking for signs of pursuit. At one point, they spotted headlights in the distance and ducked into a ditch, holding their breath until the vehicle passed. Each close call only reinforced the reality of their predicament. They were fugitives in their own town, hunted by people who had once worn the same badge. When they finally reached the safe house, a nondescript motel room guarded by federal agents, the relief was overwhelming. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves to relax, if only briefly. Rachel handed over the evidence bag, explaining its contents in detail. The lead agent, a stern woman named Agent Martinez, promised to act swiftly, coordinating with state and federal law enforcement to execute arrest warrants. Meanwhile, Claire continued to face pressure from powerful forces desperate to silence her. Her website was hit with DDoS attacks, temporarily taking it offline. Anonymous threats flooded her inbox, warning her to retract the story or face consequences. Yet, despite the intimidation, Claire refused to back down. She released additional documents and audio recordings, further solidifying the case against Langston and his associates. Back in Millbrook, chaos erupted. Arrest warrants were issued for Chief Grayson, Victor Langston, and several other high-ranking officials implicated in the conspiracy. News crews descended on the town, capturing images of handcuffed men being led away in shame. Residents gathered, in stunned disbelief, some cheering the arrests while others struggled to reconcile the betrayal of trusted leaders. Amidst the turmoil, Rachel received a visit from Emily Carter. Still shaken by recent events, Emily expressed her gratitude for Rachel's determination to uncover the truth about her father. "I never thought I'd get answers," Emily admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for giving me closure and for honoring his memory." Rachel hugged her tightly, feeling a mix of sorrow and pride. She knew the fight wasn't over yet. Legal battles would rage for months, maybe years, as those arrested fought to escape justice. But for now, the weight of secrecy had been lifted, and the shadows that had haunted Millbrook for so long were finally seeing the light. As Rachel walked away from the cemetery later that day, where she had placed fresh flowers on Detective Carter's grave, she glanced back one last time. Though the scars of betrayal ran deep, she took solace in knowing that courage and integrity could still prevail, even in the darkest of times. The fallout from the expose rocked Millbrook to its core. What had once been a quiet, unassuming town was now at the center of national headlines, with reporters and investigators descending upon it like vultures circling their prey. The arrests of Chief Grayson, Victor Langston, and other high-ranking officials sent shockwaves through the community. For many residents, it was hard to believe that the people they had trusted, people who had sworn to protect them, were complicit in such widespread corruption. Conversations buzzed in coffee shops, grocery stores, and schoolyards as people grappled with the betrayal. Rachel Monroe found herself thrust into an unfamiliar spotlight. Once a relatively unknown officer, she was now hailed as a hero by some and vilified by others. Supporters praised her bravery for standing up against powerful forces, while critics accused her of airing the town's dirty laundry and tarnishing its reputation. Anonymous threats continued to trickle in, but Rachel refused to let fear dictate her actions. She knew that exposing the truth came with risks, but she also believed it was worth every sacrifice. Federal agents worked tirelessly to untangle the web of corruption that stretched far beyond Millbrook. Wiretaps revealed connections between local criminals and larger organized crime syndicates operating across state lines. Bank records showed millions of dollars funneled through shell companies to fund illegal activities. As more evidence emerged, the scope of the conspiracy became clearer and more horrifying. It wasn't just about drugs or bribes, it was about power, control, and silencing anyone who dared challenge the status quo. Victor Langston, once untouchable, now sat behind bars, awaiting trial. His polished facade crumbled under interrogation as federal agents presented him with irrefutable proof of his crimes. In a desperate bid to save himself, he began cooperating with authorities, naming names and revealing secrets that implicated even more individuals. Each new revelation deepened the public's outrage and cemented the case against those involved. Chief Grayson's arrest hit particularly close to home for Rachel. Though she had suspected his involvement, seeing him led away in handcuffs was surreal. He had been a mentor to her during her early years on the force, someone she had looked up to and respected. But as she reviewed the evidence against him, she realized how deeply he had betrayed not only her trust, but the trust of everyone in Millbrook. It was a painful reminder that evil often wore familiar faces. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Rachel made the difficult decision to resign from the police department. The institution she had devoted her life to felt tainted, its integrity shattered by decades of deceit. While some colleagues remained loyal to her, Others distanced themselves, either out of fear or misplaced loyalty to the old guard. Rachel understood their hesitation, but she couldn't stay in a place where justice felt like a distant ideal rather than a lived reality. Her resignation sparked mixed reactions. Some saw it as a noble act, a final stand for accountability and transparency. Others viewed it as abandonment, questioning whether she had done enough to fix the system from within. But Rachel knew she had made the right choice. She needed time to heal, to process everything she had endured, and to figure out what came next. In the months that followed, Rachel dedicated herself to helping others navigate similar battles. She partnered with advocacy groups focused on fighting corruption and supporting whistleblowers. Her story resonated with people across the country, inspiring others to speak out against injustice in their own communities. She gave speeches at conferences, wrote articles detailing her experiences, and even consulted with law enforcement agencies seeking to rebuild trust after scandals. Emily Carter, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. After learning the truth about her father's disappearance, she became an advocate for families affected by unsolved cases. Together, she and Rachel launched a foundation in Detective James Carter's name, aimed at providing resources and support to those pursuing justice for loved ones wrongfully silenced. Emily often remarked that finding closure had given her a second chance at life, one she intended to use honoring her father's legacy. Back in Millbrook, the town slowly began to heal. New leadership took over the police department, committed to rebuilding trust and restoring integrity. Community meetings were held to address grievances and discuss reforms. Residents, though wary, started to participate again, determined to ensure that nothing like this could happen in the future. The cemetery where Carter's coffin had been unearthed underwent renovations, transforming it into a memorial park, symbolizing resilience and renewal. One crisp autumn morning, Rachel returned to the cemetery to visit Carter's grave. The air smelled of fallen leaves and golden sunlight filtered through the trees. Standing before the headstone, she placed a single red rose on the ground. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "You didn't fight in vain." As she turned to leave, she noticed a young girl walking hand in hand with her mother near the entrance. The girl carried a small notebook, jotting down observations about the flowers and birds around her. Something about the scene filled Rachel with hope. Corruption might have cast a long shadow over Milltown, but light always found a way to break through. And sometimes, all it took was one person willing to stand up and say, "Enough." Rachel walked away from the cemetery, her steps lighter than they had been in months. She didn't know exactly where her path would lead, but she knew she would keep moving forward, toward justice, toward truth, and toward a brighter future. Because, in the end, that was what mattered most, ensuring that no one else would ever have to endure the pain caused by silence.